The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the ballroom floor as Sophia carefully arranged the last place setting at table 12. The Sterling Club was preparing for its most exclusive event of the year, a charity gala for the city, symphony that would bring together the wealthiest and most influential people in town. As a server, Sophia was practically invisible to these guests, but she knew every face from the society pages of the newspaper. 3 years of working at the Sterling Club had taught Sophia to move quietly through events like this, refilling champagne, glasses and clearing plates while million-dollar donations were pledged over dinner conversation. The members treated her politely enough, but she might as well have been a piece of furniture for all the real attention they paid her. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, the ballroom's centerpiece wasn't just the elaborate floral arrangements or the designer gowns that would soon fill the room. It was the magnificent Steinway concert grand piano positioned perfectly in the center of the stage, its black surface gleaming under the spotlights like a sleeping giant waiting to come alive. Sophia had memorized every detail of that piano over the past 3 years. She knew exactly how many steps it took to walk from the kitchen to the bench, knew how the stage lights would feel warm on her face if she ever sat there, knew that the piano was tuned to perfection every month whether anyone played it or not. During quiet moments between events when the ballroom was empty and she was supposed to be cleaning, Sophia would sometimes stand next to the piano and run her fingers silently over the keys without pressing them down. She would imagine the rich, full sound that would emerge from such a beautiful instrument, so different from the beat-up electronic keyboard in her tiny apartment. "Sophia, they need more champagne at the VIP table," called Janet, the head server, snapping her back to reality. "And make sure you smile. These people are paying $1,000 a plate tonight." Sophia nodded and hurried to the bar, grabbing a fresh bottle of champagne from the ice bucket. As she walked toward the VIP section, she caught fragments of conversation about the evening's entertainment. The guests were particularly excited about tonight's performance. A world-renowned pianist was supposed to play a selection of challenging classical pieces as the highlight of the evening. The irony wasn't lost on Sophia that while she served drinks to people discussing the finer points of classical music, she was also a music student herself. Not at the prestigious conservatory across town where these wealthy patrons sent their children, but at the community college where she took classes between work shifts and paid tuition 1 semester at a time with her tips. Most people would be surprised to learn that the quiet waitress carrying their champagne had been studying piano for 5 years. Ever since she moved to the city with dreams of somehow making music her career. She couldn't afford private lessons, so she learned from library books, free online tutorials, and a patient professor at the community college who saw her potential and gave her extra attention. Growing up, Sophia's family couldn't afford piano lessons or even a real piano. She had taught herself the basics on a broken keyboard her neighbor was throwing away, practicing with headphones so she wouldn't disturb anyone. When other kids were taking music lessons or playing sports, Sophia was working part-time jobs to help her single mother pay bills. But music had always been her escape, her way of expressing feelings she couldn't put into words. Even working 2 jobs to support herself through school, she practiced every day, dreaming of the moment when she might get to play for people who truly appreciated classical music. As Sophia poured champagne for the symphony board members, she listened to them discussing the evening's program. They were particularly excited about the Chopin and Rachmaninoff pieces that were planned, works that Sophia had been practicing for months as part of her advanced piano class. "The interpretation of the Rachmaninoff prelude is going to be extraordinary," said Mrs. Whitmore, the symphony board chairwoman. "I heard this pianist perform it at Carnegie Hall last season, and it was absolutely breathtaking." Sophia's heart raced as she recognized the piece Mrs. Whitmore was describing. She had been working on that exact prelude for her final project, spending countless hours trying to master its dramatic intensity and technical demands. She knew every note, every dynamic marking, every subtle shift in tempo that made the piece so powerful. "It's such a shame that more young people don't appreciate classical music these days," continued Dr. Richardson, a wealthy patron who funded several music scholarships. "It takes years of proper training and cultural exposure to really understand what makes a great performance. Sophia bit her tongue as she refilled his glass. She wanted to tell him that some young people loved classical music so much they practiced on broken keyboards in studio apartments. That cultural exposure didn't require wealth if you had passion and determination. But she just smiled politely and moved on to the next table. The ballroom was filling up now with elegantly dressed guests, their jewelry sparkling under the chandeliers as they found their assigned seats. Sophia recognized several faces from newspaper photos: the mayor and his wife, a famous local businessman who owned half the buildings downtown, the university president, and several musicians from the symphony orchestra itself. As she worked, Sophia caught herself glancing repeatedly at the piano on stage. She wondered what it would feel like to sit at that bench in front of all these people, to let her fingers dance across those perfect keys, to share the music that lived inside her heart with an audience that could truly appreciate it. The thought was so impossible it almost made her laugh. These people expected their entertainment to come from world-class professionals with impressive credentials and famous names. They would never imagine that their waitress had spent the morning practicing the same pieces they were about to hear, or that she understood the music as deeply as any conservatory graduate. 5 minutes until seating is complete, announced the event coordinator over the staff radio. All servers should be ready to begin wine service once the guests are settled. Sophia straightened her black uniform and checked her appearance in the mirror behind the bar. She looked professional and invisible, exactly what was expected of someone in her position, but underneath the surface her mind was filled with music, melodies and harmonies that she dreamed of sharing with the world someday. The evening's program lay on a nearby table, and Sophia glanced at it one more time. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, major, followed by Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, 2 pieces she knew by heart, 2 pieces she had poured her soul into learning, 2 pieces she would never get to perform for people who mattered. Or so she thought. As the guests settled into their seats and the lights dimmed slightly for the dinner service, Sophia had no idea that within a few hours everything about her life would change. She had no way of knowing that sometimes the most impossible dreams come true in the most unexpected ways, or that the people who dismiss you today might be applauding you tomorrow. All she knew was that tonight, like every night, she would serve dinner to people who lived in a world she could only dream of joining, while the piano waited silently on stage, holding its secrets and its music for someone brave enough to claim them. The evening was flowing perfectly until Sophia noticed the worried expression on Mrs. Whitmore's face. The symphony board chairwoman was supposed to be enjoying the appetizer course, but instead she was frantically typing on her phone while whispering urgently to the event coordinator. Sophia was refilling water glasses at a nearby table when she overheard fragments of their conversation. Something was wrong, very wrong. The words hospital, food poisoning, and can't make it drifted through the elegant chatter of the dining room like warning bells. Mrs. Whitmore stood up abruptly and walked toward the corner of the ballroom where she could speak more privately. Sophia couldn't help but notice that several other symphony board members were now checking their phones with increasingly worried expressions. As Sophia continued serving, she watched Mrs. Whitmore make call after call, her voice becoming more desperate with each conversation. The elegant woman who usually commanded every room she entered now looked genuinely panicked, and Sophia could guess why. The featured pianist wasn't coming. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Whitmore's worst fears were confirmed when she quietly pulled the event coordinator aside. Sophia was close enough to hear the devastating news. The world-renowned pianist had been rushed to the hospital with severe food poisoning and would definitely not be performing tonight. The coordinator's face went pale. What do we do? 300 people paid premium prices specifically to hear this performance. The program was advertised for months. Mrs. Whitmore rubbed her temples, looking like she had aged 10 years in the past hour. Start calling every pianist in the city. Someone has to be available on short notice. But as Sophia served the main course, she watched the symphony board members make call after call with no success. It was a Saturday night, the biggest performance night of the week. Every professional pianist worth hiring was already booked, at concert halls, recitals, or other events across the city. The guests were beginning to notice that something was wrong. Conversations at several tables turned to speculation about why the evening's hosts looked so stressed. Some people had attended specifically for the musical program, and word was starting to spread that there might not be a performance after. Dr. Richardson, the wealthy patron Sophia had served earlier, flagged her down as she passed his table. "Young lady, do you know what's happening with tonight's entertainment?" Mrs. Whitmore looks quite upset. Sophia wasn't supposed to discuss event problems with guests, but she could see that rumors were already spreading. "I believe there may be some delays with the musical program, sir. I'm sure Mrs. Whitmore will make an announcement soon." By the time dessert was being served, Mrs. Whitmore had exhausted every contact in her phone. She had called the music departments at 3 local universities, contacted the symphony orchestra's personnel manager, and even reached out to piano teachers who might know talented advanced students. But everyone who was qualified to perform at this level was either already committed or couldn't prepare complex pieces on such short notice. Sophia watched from the service area as Mrs. Whitmore finally accepted defeat. The older woman walked slowly to the microphone at the front of the ballroom, her face showing the strain of the evening's crisis. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Whitmore's voice carried clearly through the sound system, causing conversations throughout the room to stop. "I'm afraid I have some disappointing news to share with you this evening." The ballroom fell completely, silent as 300 guests turned their attention to the stage. Sophia felt her heart pounding as she realized what was about to happen. "Our featured pianist has been hospitalized with a sudden illness and will not be able to perform tonight," Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice carefully controlled. "Despite our best efforts to find a replacement on such short notice, we have been unable to locate anyone qualified to perform the challenging program that was planned for this evening." A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked genuinely upset, while others seemed more understanding of the circumstances. But Sophia could see that Mrs. Whitmore was devastated by having to disappoint so many important supporters of the symphony. "The evening will continue with our planned auction and reception," Mrs. Whitmore added, trying to sound optimistic. "We apologize for this unexpected change and appreciate your understanding." As Mrs. Whitmore stepped away from the microphone, Sophia felt something stirring inside her chest. She knew those pieces. She had been practicing them for months. The Chopin Nocturne, the Rachmaninoff Prelude, they were as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. But the idea of volunteering was terrifying. These people expected world-class entertainment from famous professionals. What would they think of a waitress offering to fill in? What if she embarrassed herself in front of the most important people in the city's cultural scene? Sophia tried to focus on clearing tables and serving coffee, but her mind kept returning to the silent piano on stage. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing, all the dreams she had harbored while working double shifts to pay for her education. This might be the only chance she would ever get to perform for people who could actually help her career. As the disappointed guests began making their way to the auction area, Sophia noticed Mrs. Whitmore sitting alone at a corner table, looking utterly defeated. The woman who had worked for months to organize this perfect evening was watching it fall apart despite her best efforts. Sophia's hands were shaking as she approached Mrs. Whitmore's table. She had never spoken to the symphony board chairwoman about anything other than meal service, and she wasn't even sure how to begin such an impossible conversation. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore," Sophia said quietly, her voice barely audible above the background noise of the reception. Mrs. Whitmore looked up with tired eyes. "Yes, dear? Do you need something for the service?" Sophia took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would either change her life or destroy any chance she had of being taken seriously in this city's music scene. "I couldn't help but overhear about the pianist," Sophia began, her voice growing slightly stronger. "I know this might sound crazy, but I've been studying piano for several years. I'm familiar with the pieces that were planned for tonight's program." Mrs. Whitmore's expression shifted from exhausted politeness to confused surprise. "I'm sorry, what are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that if you need someone to fill in, I might be able to help," Sophia said, the words tumbling out before she could lose her nerve. "I know it's not conventional, but I've been working on both the Chopin and the Rachmaninoff pieces. I could perform them tonight if you think it would be better than having no music at all." Mrs. Whitmore stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to process what she had just heard. You're a piano student? Yes, ma'am. I study at the community college and take private lessons when I can afford them. I know I'm not a professional, but I've been practicing these pieces for months. I understand if you think it's too risky, but I wanted to offer in case it might help save the evening. Mrs. Whitmore was quiet for what felt like an eternity, clearly wrestling with an impossible decision. She could take a chance on an unknown waitress, or she could disappoint 300 influential donors who had expected a memorable musical experience. Finally, she looked directly into Sophia's eyes. Are you absolutely certain you can perform these pieces at a level appropriate for this audience? Sophia's heart was racing, but her voice was steady when she answered, Yes, ma'am, I am. Mrs. Whitmore stared at Sophia for what felt like an eternity, her mind clearly racing through all the possible outcomes of such an unprecedented decision. The silence stretched between them while the sounds of the disappointed reception continued in the background, guests discussing the evening's unexpected turn and staff members clearing the dinner service. I need to be completely honest with you, Mrs. Whitmore said finally, her voice low and serious. This audience includes some of the most knowledgeable classical music enthusiasts in the city, professional musicians, conservatory professors, critics who review concerts for major publications. If this goes badly... I understand, Sophia said quietly. My reputation isn't the only one at risk here. You're trusting me with the symphonies, credibility, and your own professional standing. Mrs. Whitmore nodded slowly. Exactly. These people donate millions of dollars to support classical music. They expect excellence, and they have the expertise to recognize it when they hear it. She paused, studying Sophia's face. Tell me about your training. Where do you study? Who is your teacher? Sophia felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. I take classes at Metro Community College with Professor Chen. I know it's not Juilliard or the conservatory, but Professor Chen trained at Carnegie Hall, and he's been very encouraging about my progress. How long have you been playing? Seriously, about 5 years, but I've been teaching myself since I was a teenager. Sophia decided to be completely honest about her background. My family couldn't afford lessons when I was young, so I learned from library books and online videos until I could save up for real instruction. Mrs. Whitmore's expression was unreadable. And you're confident about these specific pieces? The Chopin Nocturne and the Rachmaninoff Prelude? I've been working on them all semester for my advanced repertoire class. The Nocturne is challenging but manageable, and the Prelude... Sophia paused, thinking about the countless hours she had spent mastering its dramatic passages. The Prelude is technically demanding, but I know it well. I've performed both pieces for my professor and received strong feedback. Mrs. Whitmore glanced toward the stage where the piano waited silently, then back at Sophia. I need to make a decision that could either save this evening or make it even worse. Give me your honest assessment. Not your hopes or dreams, but your realistic evaluation of whether you can deliver a performance that won't embarrass everyone involved. Sophia took a deep breath, thinking about all her practice sessions, all the feedback from Professor Chen, all the hours she had spent perfecting these exact pieces. Mrs. Whitmore, I can't promise I'm as good as the pianist you originally booked, but I can promise that I know these pieces inside and out, that I've prepared them to the best of my ability, and that I'll give everything I have to make this work. The symphony board chairwoman was quiet for another long moment, clearly weighing options that all seemed risky. Finally, she made her decision. All right, we'll try it. But I need you to understand that if this doesn't work out, we'll need to stop the performance quickly to minimize the damage. Sophia felt a surge of excitement mixed with terror. I understand completely. Good. Now, we need to get you ready. Mrs. Whitmore stood up and motioned for Sophia to follow her. First thing, you can't perform in your server uniform. Do you have anything else to wear? Sophia's heart sank as she realized she hadn't thought about this practical detail. I have my regular clothes in the staff room, but they're just jeans and a sweater. Nothing appropriate for a performance. Mrs. Whitmore considered this problem for a moment, then flagged down Janet, the head server. Janet, I need your help with something unusual. Do any of the female staff members have something black and formal that might fit Sophia? Janet looked confused but naughty. Carmen in catering is about the same size, and she brought a nice black dress in case she needed to help with front-of-house service. Is everything okay? I'll explain later, Mrs. Whitmore said. Just get the dress, please. And tell the other staff that Sophia will be unavailable for the rest of the evening. As Janet hurried away, Mrs. Whitmore turned back to Sophia. You'll have about 20 minutes to get changed and prepare yourself. Is that enough time? Yes, ma'am. I just need a few minutes to warm up my hands and run through the pieces mentally. Good. I'm going to make an announcement to the guests that we found a replacement performer. I won't mention your background. I'll simply introduce you as a local musician who has graciously agreed to fill in. Sophia felt a flutter of nerves at the thought of being introduced to that distinguished audience. What should I do if people ask about my background afterward? Let's focus on getting through the performance first, Mrs. Whitmore said practically. Everything else we can figure out later. Janet returned with the borrowed dress, a simple but elegant black sheath that would be perfect for a classical performance. Carmen says it should fit fine and she hopes everything works out okay. Mrs. Whitmore handed the dress to Sophia. Go get changed and meet me backstage in 15 minutes. I'll announce the replacement performance and give you a proper introduction. Sophia hurried toward the staff changing area. Her mind was spinning with the reality of what was about to happen. In less than half an hour, she would be sitting at that beautiful Steinway in front of 300 of the city's most influential people, performing pieces she had only ever played for her professor and a handful of classmates. She changed into the borrowed dress, which fit perfectly, and tried to calm her racing heart. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she knew that was normal performance nerves. She had felt the same way before every exam and recital at school. The real challenge would be managing her nerves once she sat down at the piano. She had never performed for an audience larger than 30 people, and never for people whose opinion could genuinely impact her future in music. As she made her way backstage, Sophia could hear Mrs. Whitmore's voice over the sound system, addressing the guests who were slowly returning to their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that we have found a replacement for this evening's musical program. A talented local musician has graciously agreed to perform the originally planned pieces for us tonight. Sophia peeked through the curtain and saw the audience settling back into their seats with renewed interest. Some looked skeptical about the last-minute replacement, while others seemed curious about who Mrs. Whitmore had managed to find on such short notice. Please join me in welcoming our performer for this evening, Mrs. Whitmore continued. Sophia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment that would either launch her musical career or end it before it had really begun. She thought about Professor Chen's encouragement, about all the hours she had spent dreaming of this kind of opportunity, about the music that lived inside her waiting to be shared. She took a deep breath, smoothed down the borrowed dress, and prepared to step into a spotlight that would change her life forever. Please give a warm welcome to Sophia Martinez. Sophia stepped onto the stage and felt the full weight of 300 pairs of eyes focused entirely on her. The spotlight was brighter and warmer than she had imagined, making everything beyond the first few rows disappear into darkness. For a moment, she felt completely alone with the piano and the enormity of what she was about to attempt. The applause was polite but reserved, the kind given to an unknown performer before anyone knew what to expect. She could sense the skepticism in the audience. These people had paid premium prices to hear a world-renowned pianist, and instead, they were getting a last-minute replacement whose qualifications were completely unknown to them. As Sophia walked toward the piano bench, she caught glimpses of faces in the front rows. Dr. Richardson sat with his arms crossed, looking like he was already preparing to be disappointed. Mrs. Whitmore watched from the side of the stage with an expression that mixed hope and terror. Several people in the audience were checking their phones, probably wondering if they should leave early. The Steinway looked even more magnificent up close, its polished surface reflecting the stage lights like a dark mirror. Sophia had dreamed of sitting at a piano like this for years, but she had never imagined it would happen under such intense pressure. 300 people were waiting to judge whether she belonged on this stage or if Mrs. Whitmore had made a terrible mistake. Sophia sat down at the bench and adjusted her position, trying to calm her racing heart. She could feel the weight of the silence in the room as the audience waited for her to begin. Some people were still settling into their seats, clearly expecting a quick amateur performance that would allow them to leave early and salvage something from their expensive evening. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the familiar coolness of ivory beneath her fingers. For just a moment, she closed her eyes and tried to block out everything else. The watching crowd, the pressure, the knowledge that her entire future might depend on the next 15 minutes. Instead, she thought about the music itself. The Chopin nocturne that had spoken to her soul the first time she heard it, with its gentle melody that gradually revealed deeper layers of emotion. She thought about Professor Chen's words during their last lesson. Don't play for the audience. Sophia, play for the music, let it speak through you. Sophia opened her eyes and began. The first notes of Chopin's nocturne in E-flat major floated through the ballroom with a purity and control that immediately silenced any remaining conversations. The opening phrase was deceptively simple, but Sophia's touch revealed the sophisticated musical understanding that had taken her years to develop. Within the first few measures, something remarkable happened in the audience. The skeptical expressions began to change to surprised attention. People who had been preparing to leave early found themselves leaning forward in their seats. The quality of Sophia's playing was unmistakably professional, with the kind of technical precision and musical sensitivity that couldn't be faked. Dr. Richardson's arms slowly uncrossed as he recognized that this was not the amateur performance he had expected. Mrs. Whitmore's terrified expression began to soften into amazement as she realized her desperate gamble might actually pay off. As Sophia continued through the nocturne, her confidence grew with each phrase. The piano responded beautifully to her touch, producing the rich, warm tones she had always imagined this piece could have. The familiar melody seemed to come alive under her fingers, speaking directly to the hearts of everyone listening. But it wasn't just technical competence that captivated the audience. It was the emotion Sophia brought to the music. Every note carried the weight of her dreams, the frustration of working double shifts while studying music, the hope that someday her talent would be recognized. The nocturne became her story, told without words but with perfect clarity. The audience was completely silent now, drawn into the spell of Sophia's performance. People who had come to the gala for social networking found themselves genuinely moved by the music. Even the waitstaff had stopped their work and gathered at the edges of the ballroom to listen. As the nocturne reached its gentle conclusion, Sophia transitioned seamlessly into the opening of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor. If the Chopin had surprised the audience, the Rachmaninoff would either confirm her abilities or expose any limitations in her training. The prelude began with its famous, haunting three-note motif, but Sophia's interpretation was bold and confident from the very first measure. This was a piece that demanded both technical mastery and dramatic understanding, and she approached it with the kind of artistic maturity that usually took decades to develop. The contrast between the gentle Chopin and the intense Rachmaninoff showcased the full range of Sophia's abilities. Where the nocturne had been intimate and personal, the prelude was powerful and dramatic, requiring her to demonstrate different aspects of her technique and musical personality. As she moved through the piece's demanding passages, Sophia felt something she had never experienced before, the sensation of being completely connected to both the music and the audience. Every technical challenge felt effortless. Every emotional moment resonated perfectly with her own feelings about this incredible opportunity. The audience was now completely captivated. Professor Williams from the conservatory, who had been prepared to cringe through an amateur performance, found himself taking mental notes about Sophia's remarkable interpretation. The music critic from the city newspaper had put away his phone and was listening with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for performances at Carnegie Hall. But perhaps the most significant transformation was happening in Mrs. Whitmore herself. The woman who had taken an enormous risk on an unknown server was beginning to realize that she might have accidentally discovered one of the most talented pianists in the city. As Sophia built toward the prelude's climactic moments, the music seemed to fill every corner of the ballroom with its intensity. Her technique was flawless, but more importantly, Her interpretation revealed of musical understanding that left the professional musicians in the audience genuinely impressed. The famous dramatic passages that had challenged Sophia for months in practice now flowed effortlessly from her fingers. Years of dedicated study, combined with natural talent and the adrenaline of performing for the most important audience of her life, had elevated her playing to a level she had never achieved before. As she approached the final, thunderous chords of the prelude, Sophia felt a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with nerves or fear. This was pure joy, the joy of sharing something beautiful with people who could truly appreciate it, the joy of proving that talent and dedication could overcome any obstacle. The last notes of the Rachmaninoff rang out through the ballroom with perfect power and precision, then faded into a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Sophia sat perfectly still at the piano bench, hardly able to believe what had just happened. For a moment that felt like an eternity, no one in the audience moved. The silence was complete and profound, as if everyone was afraid that speaking would break the spell of what they had just witnessed. Then, from somewhere in the back of the ballroom, a single person began to clap. The single clap from the back of the ballroom was quickly joined by another, then another, until suddenly the entire audience erupted in thunderous applause. But this wasn't the polite, measured clapping usually heard at formal events. This was genuine, enthusiastic appreciation from people who knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet. 300 of the city's most distinguished citizens were giving Sophia a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever, growing louder rather than fading. People who had arrived expecting disappointment were now applauding with an intensity usually reserved for world-famous performers at major concert halls. Sophia sat frozen at the piano bench, tears streaming down her face as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The dream she had carried for years, performing for people who truly understood and appreciated classical music, had not only come true but had exceeded every fantasy she had ever dared to imagine. Mrs. Whitmore was the first to reach the stage, her own eyes bright with tears as she approached Sophia. The symphony board chairwoman who had taken such an enormous risk looked like she could barely believe what she had just witnessed. "That was absolutely incredible," Mrs. Whitmore said, her voice shaking with emotion. "In 30 years of organizing concerts, I have never heard anything quite like that. You didn't just save the evening. You made it unforgettable." The applause continued as more people began making their way toward the stage. Dr. Richardson, who had started the evening with crossed arms and skeptical expression, was among the first to approach. His entire demeanor had changed from dismissive to genuinely impressed. "Young lady, that was remarkable," he said, extending his hand to Sophia. "I've attended performances at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center, and what you just did belongs on any of those stages. Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" Before Sophia could answer, Professor Williams from the conservatory appeared at Dr. Richardson's side. "I was wondering the same thing," he said with undisguised admiration. "Your interpretation of the Rachmaninoff was particularly outstanding. The way you handled those dramatic passages showed real musical maturity." Sophia wiped her eyes and tried to find her voice. "I study at Metro Community College with Professor Chen. I know it's not as prestigious as the conservatory, but Professor Chen has been wonderful." Professor Williams looked surprised. "Michael Chen, he's an excellent teacher, but he usually works with beginning students. How long have you been studying with him?" 3 years, Sophia said. "He took me on as a special project after hearing me play. Before that, I was mostly self-taught." The crowd around the stage continued to grow as more people wanted to meet the mysterious pianist who had transformed their evening. A well-dressed woman introduced herself as Rebecca Martinez, a talent manager who represented several classical musicians. "Sophia, I hope you don't mind me being direct, but I would love to discuss your career plans with you," Rebecca said, handing her a business card. "What you just demonstrated suggests you have the potential for a professional performance career, if that's something you're interested in pursuing." Another voice joined the conversation. "I completely agree," said Thomas Wheeler, a music critic for the city newspaper. "I'll be writing about tonight's performance, and I think our readers would be very interested in your story. Would you be willing to do an interview?" Sophia felt overwhelmed by all the attention and opportunities suddenly being offered to her. I work here as a server," she said honestly. "I've been studying music part-time while working to support myself through school. I never imagined anything like this could happen." The revelation that their evening's savior was actually one of the club's own employees sent another wave of amazement through the gathering crowd. Several people looked genuinely embarrassed that they had been served dinner by someone with such extraordinary talent without ever recognizing it. Mrs. Whitmore stepped forward to address the crowd that had gathered around Sophia. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we should give our performer a chance to catch her breath. This has been quite an evening for all of us." But the conversations continued as people exchanged contact information with Sophia and discussed various opportunities. Dr. Richardson mentioned a scholarship fund he administered for promising musicians. Professor Williams talked about advanced placement options at the conservatory. The talent manager discussed performance opportunities and professional development. As the crowd gradually dispersed and returned to the reception, Mrs. Whitmore pulled Sophia aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know that what happened tonight changes everything," Mrs. Whitmore said seriously. "You'll have opportunities now that weren't available to you this morning, but I also want to make sure you understand that this is just the beginning. Talent like yours needs proper nurturing and development." Sophia nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "I'm not sure what to do next. This is all so overwhelming." "Take your time to think about it," Mrs. Whitmore advised, "but don't let fear hold you back from pursuing what you were obviously meant to do. Tonight proved that you belong on stages like this one." As the evening wound down, Sophia found herself surrounded by business cards and phone numbers from people who wanted to help her develop her career. The scholarship opportunities alone could transform her ability to pursue advanced musical education. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Janet, the head server, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Sophia, I've worked with you for 3 years and had no idea," Janet said, shaking her head in amazement. "You've been serving tables and cleaning up after these people, and all along you had this incredible gift. I'm so proud of you." The other staff members gathered around to congratulate Sophia, their faces showing a mixture of pride, amazement, and happiness for someone they had worked alongside for years. They had witnessed one of their own transform from invisible server to celebrated artist in the space of a single evening. As Sophia finally left the Sterling Club that night, she carried with her a folder full of business cards and contact information that represented possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The scholarship applications, audition opportunities, and performance bookings would require careful consideration and planning. But more than the practical opportunities, Sophia carried with her the knowledge that she had proven something important. Not just to the distinguished audience who had applauded her, but to herself. She had shown that talent and dedication could overcome any obstacle, that dreams were worth pursuing no matter how impossible they seemed. 6 months later, Sophia performed as a guest soloist with the City Symphony Orchestra, playing the same Rachmaninoff prelude that had announced her arrival in the classical music world. In the audience that night were many of the same people who had first heard her play, but now they came specifically to hear Sophia Martinez, the remarkable pianist who had emerged from the most unexpected circumstances. The evening at the Sterling Club became legendary in the city's cultural circles, remembered not just as the night when a talented waitress saved a failing gala, but as the moment when everyone learned that extraordinary gifts can be found in the most ordinary places, waiting for the right opportunity to shine. Mrs. Whitmore kept the program from that evening framed in her office, a reminder that sometimes the greatest discoveries happen when we're brave enough to take chances on the unexpected.